What's going on, YouTube? Johny Mac here. Today I got a special treat for you. This is going to be the first installment of a perpetual series featuring different builds for the Valor Plates in Godfall. Now what's going to make this series different from other videos on YouTube is that this is not just going to be my builds, this is going to be builds from various other members in the Godfall community. Now to keep this series going, I will be taking submissions from the community, not just PC but also PS5 players. If you're interested in having your build feature on one of my videos, I'll have some instructions and minimum requirements in the description below for your submission. So without any further delay, let's get into it. So let's go over my personal Valor plate of choice right now, Armistice. You guys I'm sure have seen him featured in many videos across the YouTube community, and for good reason. He looks badass. But no, seriously. We're going to be playing off of his particular passive that is very important in the late game and is overlooked in the early game. And we're talking about breach damage. Now, what's cool about breach damage is that it builds up in a little yellow bar underneath the enemy's health bar. And this particular bar is overlooked in the early game. And you really don't start paying attention to it until later on in the late game whenever you start getting into harder bosses. Now, what's cool about the breach damage bar is that whenever the breach damage bar reaches 100% for that enemy, it puts the enemy into a downed state. And that's where things get nice, because a downed enemy, it does no damage to you or your party. So in the late game, whenever you're facing those really heavy hitting bosses or those heavy hitting horde mobs, if they're not doing any damage to you or your party, that's more damage that you get to put out without being punished if you mess up. Now let's take a look at his Archon Fury, or his ultimate as some of the people in the community say. When you activate his Archon Fury, you unleash a shockwave that breaches nearby enemies and deals 1 physical damage. The 1 physical damage is, it is what it is. So during Archon Fury, you get plus 50% to breach damage, which means that when the enemy has been breached and is in that down state, you do an extra 50% damage to that boss or trash mob or what have you. The next is plus 100% damage to breached enemies, plus 100% to takedown damage. So if you manage to get a takedown while that enemy is breached, that's an extra 100 damage on top of that. And you get an extra 50% damage whenever you defeat a breached enemy or you defeat an enemy with a takedown. So whenever you're in the middle of fighting all these trash mobs and you manage to get a couple takedowns, that's an extra 50% damage. You pop that ultimate whenever you're in the middle of a bunch of trash mobs and you get a couple takedowns, that's a lot of damage. So then you just turn around and start beating on that boss. And in the end game, let's face it, it's all about the bosses, because that's where you get that sweet, sweet loot. So let's get into the actual basic build as far as the skills go. As you can see, it's very rudimentary, very basic and raw. The overall objective here is to actually provide a maximum amount of survivability and provide enough utility, but we are going to end up focusing on technique damage. But as you can see, I'm maxed out on all the raw basics. Weapon timing, I put 1 point in, just simply because sometimes when you're swinging the two-handers, having that extra little parry can actually be the difference between living and dying. And now we're going to move on to the augments. I wanted to feature several different core components of the augment tree. Technique damage is a very important part in this build, mainly because of the two-handers that I have. So we're really focusing on putting out some raw damage numbers. Also, we're focusing on the Archon Fury skill, and I even have an augment that when you place your banner, it summons a spirit, and that spirit will attack enemies, and they actually serve as like a pseudo tank for you. So if you're in a pinch, you can toss that banner down and the spirits will actually tank for you. Now, as far as my equipment goes, you'll see that I focus heavily on breach damage and soul shatter buildup and weak point damage. With all those particular aspects combined, you end up with a combination to hit very, very, very hard. You'll also notice as well that the two-handed hammer that I have provides an extra aspect of survivability, as whenever I defeat an enemy with my technique, it provides overhealth. Now just a quick disclaimer, guys, this isn't a fully tuned build. As you can see, I still have an epic ring in this build, but just like any other build, it still requires fine tuning. In this segment here, I tried my best to demonstrate the survivability that this build actually has and its ability to pull through in a pinch. And in this next clip, I'd try to demonstrate its potential to actually handle grouped up mobs as well. When you do your Southern technique and you hit clustered up mobs and you hit those weak points, it has a potential to do a lot of damage. Now that I've showcased my build for the video, let's go ahead and move on over to the community submissions. First up is one of my personal favorites. It's an Aegishorn build by Tomer over on Discord. Tomer states that his primary focus was to build around Aegishorn's Archon Fury, which is the minus 30% damage. You'll also see in the video that he does a pretty good job of having banner uptime, in which he actually uses the banner that summons 2 spirits. This is actually a pretty effective way to help deal with adds and allow you to focus on the boss and deal extra damage. Tomer actually made me aware that shortly after his submission, he actually revamped his build slightly and it's more fine-tuned now. So, you know, as with all builds, they do change with time. Now with Tomer's skill tree, as you can see, he went pretty raw, similar to the way I did with my Armistice build. Now let's move on over into the actual showcase of this build. Now it starts off a little slow at first, but then I quickly realize that this build has something special. In the blink of an eye, he switches from a more conservative stance and moves directly over into a more aggressive stance where he literally starts face tanking the boss. And I would like to take a quick note, if you keep an eye on his health bar the entire time, he's actually generating a good bit of overhealth, and he is regenerating a lot of his own health as well. Next, we're going to be taking a look at a Bulwark build submitted by my buddy Morkai over on Discord. Now, I will say that Bulwark is one of the most overlooked Valor plates in Godfall, but Morkai does a really good job of playing to the passive that Bulwark offers, which is the bleed status. He gets a lot of bonus damage from inflicting ailments, and he uses the Sword of Courage, which is the legendary longsword that when you inflict bleed on the target, it shoots up to 2 projectiles that each deal a set amount of damage. In this case, his does 3181 worth of damage, which is a lot, especially if you're proccing bleed quite frequently. Now that we saw what Bulwark can do in action, let's go ahead and take a look at another underdog. It's the very first Valor plate that you unlock in Godfall, Phoenix. Once again, this build is brought to us by Morkai over on Discord, and I cannot say enough about this build, guys. When I first saw this clip, I literally said, what the f just happened? Now in this build, Morkai takes advantage of Phoenix's passive, which is Ignite, and then he also focuses on weapon technique, crit chance, and crit damage. The build also features a great amount of splash damage whenever an enemy is defeated.
In the darkest night, I saw your eyes. A sense of threat that I can't forget. I wanna know who you are. This is what I need to know. So take my hand and let our fears go. Take me to your jungle, where the rain is warm and the birds fly. Take me to your kingdom. Yeah, take me to the, take me to the. Take me to your jungle, where the rain is warm and the birds fly. Take me to your kingdom. Yeah, take me to the jungle.
As always, guys, I hope that you found this video useful and inspirational for your current build, or maybe a build that you're going to work on in the future. If you did find it useful, please like and subscribe. I will be putting out more videos just like this one, and as a subscriber, you'll be notified as soon as I upload my next video in this series. And once again, if you have a build that you want to have featured in one of my future videos, I'll have instructions in the description below. Thanks for watching.
No words describe your savage life. Ooh, let's give it a go like a purpose show.